Okay, so now we're going to factor each of these trinomials. These four we'll do together, and then we'll turn you loose on some to do on your own. So there's two ways to do these. One is using the AM technique. In that approach, we look for two numbers that multiply out to 8. We always look multiply first, even though we call it AM. The A is over the middle term, the M at the end. So A does come before M in sequence, but not in the order that we investigate. Always look for two numbers that multiply out to 8. Those numbers, there's ways to make 8. There's 1 and 8, 2 and 4. The reason it's so important to begin with the last number is it limits your possibilities so you're not there forever. And which of those combinations, 1 and 8 or 2 and 4, add up to 9? Well, the answer would be 1 and 8. So the correct answers are n plus 1 and n plus 8. Quick mental check, multiplying back. N times n is n squared. N times 8 is 8n. 1 times n is 1n. Add up 8 n's and 1 n, we get 9n. And 1 times 8 is 8. Okay, we're good there. Now, let's try the next one. We'll do a little stop and start here. You give it a shot, and I'll show you the correct answer. Okay, so this should be a j instead of an n, sorry. N times n is n squared. N times negative 3 is negative 3n's. Negative 7 times n is negative 7n's. Negative 3n's and negative 7n's indeed add up to negative 10n's. And then negative 7 times negative 3 is equal to 21. So we know they work. All right, so that's using the AM approach. What two numbers multiply out to 21, add up to negative 10? And that would clearly be 7 and 3, because negative 7 times negative 3 is positive 21, and negative 7 plus negative 3 is negative 10. But what if you chose to use the graphing calculator on number 2? Well, that's where you use the y equals button, and under y1, you always take the last number and put divided by x, so you do 21 divided by x. And under y2, and also in parentheses under y1, under y2, making sure it's in parentheses, you do 21 divided by x, and then you always add the suffix at the end plus x. When you do that, you look in that third column for where you find negative 10, and when you look over to the two columns on the left, in either order, it'll say negative 7 and negative 3. On the first one, under y1, you would put y equals 8 divided by x in parentheses. And then under y2, you do parentheses 8 divided by x, then plus x at the end. And we always look in the third column for whatever's the middle term here. We look for the 9. And then look on the left of it. And in either order, it'll tell you 1 and 8. So you try number 3 now. Using stop and start, of course. Okay, so I want to multiply out to equal negative 35. I want to add up to equal negative 2. Under the calculator with y1, I would want in parentheses negative 35 divided by x. And under y2, I would write the same thing as was in y1, in parentheses negative 35 divided by x. It's always whatever was in y1. And then at the end, the suffix plus x always has that suffix. And when you do that, you're going to look for negative 2 in the third column and see what numbers are before it. Or you can say what two numbers multiply out to negative 35 and add up to negative 2. And those numbers are negative 7 and 5. Let's just do a quick mental check back. N times n is n squared. N times 5 is 5n. Negative 7 times n is negative 7n. 5n's and negative 7n's do add up to negative 2n's. And negative 7 times 5 is negative 35. Okay. Now you try the last one, number 4. A little stop and start action. Okay, so if I was using the graphing calculator, under y1 I would do in parentheses negative 10 divided by x, and under y2 I would do that same exact thing as in y1 plus x at the end, and I'd look for where in the third column it says 3, and then I'd look at the two previous columns and it would say 5 and negative 2 in either order. If I do this without the calculator, I'd say, okay, AM, looking for two numbers that multiply out to negative 10, add up to positive 3. And that would be 5 and negative 2. Let's do a quick mental check and check ourselves. N times n is n squared. N times negative 2 is negative 2n. 5 times n is 5n. Adding up negative 2n's and 5n's, I come up with 3n's. M's, these should be M's, sorry. And 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. Okay, so that's our brief review of factoring trinomials. You try these 6 and I will show you the correct answers. Feel free to do it using either graphing or with the graphing calculator, I should say, or with a little stop and start action, then we'll go over all of these. Okay, so first one, a plus 2 times a plus 7. This one I'll do using AM. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply out to equal 14, add up to equal 9. Two numbers multiply out to 14, add up to 9. I'll go with 2 and 7. Let's check. A times a is a squared. A times 7 is 7a. 2 times a is 2a. So 7a's and 2a's add up to 9a's. And 2 times 7 is 14. So I know that's correct. Number 8. Well, I could do AM. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply out to 12 and add up to -8. But this one, let me explain as if we had used the graphing calculator. Under y1, I would put in parentheses, always the last term, which is 12 divided by x. And then under y2, I would put that same exact thing, make sure it's in parentheses, 12 divided by x, parenthesis, and then plus x, always a plus x at the end. I look in the third column for where it says -8, and then I look in the two previous columns, it'll say -2 and -6 in either order. So, distributing back, n times n is n squared, n times -6 is -6n, -2 times n is -2n, -6n and -2n add up to -8n, -2 times -6 is 12. Okay. Number 9. I'll do this one using AM again. I want two numbers that multiply out to -8, add up to -2. Oh, 4 and 2 will get me a 2, and in this case I got to add up to a -2. So that always indicates what the sign of the bigger number should be, as long as the lead coefficient is 1. So it's going to be v minus 4 and v plus 2. Let's distribute back and check. V times v is v squared. V times 2 is 2v, positive. -4 times v is -4v. So 2v and -4v do add up to a -2v. That looks good. -4 times 2 is -8. Okay, let's take a look at number 10. Number 10 is, I'm going to do this with the graphing calculator. This time, under y1, I'm going to put in parentheses negative, make sure it says negative, 24 divided by x. And then under y2, I'm going to put in parentheses again, -24 divided by x, and then a suffix of plus x. Look in the last column for where it says 5. Then I peek at the two previous columns, it'll say -3 and 8 in either order. Let's check by working back. C times c is c squared, c times 8 is 8c. -3 times c is -3c. So 8c's and -3c's is 5c's. -3 times 8 is -24. Okay, number 11. Using AM, I want two numbers that multiply out to 20, add up to -21. Well, that would be -1 and -20. Check ourselves back. N times n is n squared. N times -20 is -20n. -1 times n is -1n. -20n and -1n is equal to -21n. And -1 times -20 is +20. So that is my correct solution there. And number 12, I'll think of in terms of the graphing calculator. Under y1, I'm going to put parenthesis 32, always the last term, divided by x, close that parenthesis. And under y2, I put the same exact thing as was in for y1 with the parentheses. And then at the end, I put the suffix plus x. I'd look in that last column for where it says -12, and then look in the two previous columns. In either order, it'll say -4 and -8 on the same line as the -12. So, distributing back, b times b is b squared, b times -8 is -8. -4 times b is -4b. -8b's and -4b's add up to -12b's. And then -4 times -8 is +32. Okay? So I know I've got that right. All right. So now we'll take a look at the next slide, which is to factoring a trinomial, but this time the lead coefficient is other than 1. And you remember our strategy here. The first thing we're always going to do is look for a greatest common factor. Factor it out, and then look and see, can you factor what remains, that remaining trinomial? If you can't find the greatest common factor, That's when you go into what I commonly refer to as Plan B, but where you multiply the last term by the leading coefficient and then divide it back in later. So I'm going to show you, actually I'm not going to show you anything. Let's see what you remember about numbers 1 and 2, okay? Number 1, just do number 1. I'll go over that with you in a minute. Stop and start time. Okay, so what they share in common here is a 5. That's what I noticed. Always look for that greatest common factor first. When I pull out the 5, I'm left with n squared plus 2n minus 3. Then I look at the n squared plus 2n minus 3 and I say, hey, can I factor that? Well, what two numbers using am multiply out to negative 3 and add up to positive 2? And those numbers would work out to be positive 3 and negative 1. So if I distribute back, I would check myself. Very quickly, n times n is n squared, n times negative 1 is negative 1n, 3 times n is 3n's, negative 1n and 3n's add up to 2n's, and 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. And then if I multiply that by 5, I would get 5n squared plus 10n minus 15. Okay, so you try number 10 now. Go ahead. And when I answer it, I'll use graphing calculator to help us. Now, you might ask, why don't I just use a graphing calculator right away and look to factor it that way? And the reason is because of this 2x squared in front. Whenever there's a lead coefficient other than 1, our normal way of doing things, we cannot do them that way anymore. So we must go with the approach where I look for a greatest common factor, and if it's there, you have to use it. Don't go to the Plan B approach where we multiply the last term, the last term by the leading coefficient and so on. You don't want to do that. It will not work. So I factor out the 2, and that leaves me with 2 times, I mixed up my x's and my n's here, sorry. X squared plus 3x, it should say minus 4, factoring out the 2. And then to factor this guy, I would go in my graphing calculator. Under y1, I would put negative 4 divided by x in parentheses. And under y2, I would repeat that, and then plus x at the end. And then I would look for wherever it says in that last column, positive 3, and look at the two terms in front, and you'll find in either order 4 and negative 1. So my correct factorization is 2 times x plus 4 times x minus 1. You can do a quick mental check to that. You will see that it works. Now, what's the difference between numbers 1 and 10 and then number 11? The big difference is that number 11 does not have a greatest common factor, so we go to our Plan B approach. Now, I'm going to show you the correct answer to this. It's 2x plus 1 times x minus 5. How do I get that answer? Well, the way I get that answer is I take the first, when I notice there's no common factor in a lead coefficient other than 1, I take the 2, that's the lead coefficient, I multiply it by the last term, and that gives me, over here on the right in black, x squared minus 11x plus 10. Then I just factor that, business as usual. That's x minus 1 times x minus 10. You can do that any way you want, AM, graphing calculator, whatever floats your boat. But we have to balance out the fact that I multiplied the last term by 2 here. So I need to divide the last terms by 2 here. So negative 1 becomes negative 1/2, and negative 10 becomes negative 10/2. If you can reduce the fraction, do so. So 10 over 2 is 5. So this last term is x minus 5. If you cannot reduce the fraction, which you cannot for this first term over here, I'm just like in elementary school going to put the 2 in front. So it becomes 2x minus 1. And if you do a quick mental check multiplying back, you'll see that it works. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times negative 5 is negative 10x. Negative 1 times x is negative 1x. Negative 10x, and negative 1x add up to negative 11x. And negative 1 times negative 5 is positive 5. You try number 12. We'll go over that one in just a moment. Okay, so the correct answer is 3a minus 2 times a plus 4. Let's just do a quick mental check and confirm. 3a times a is 3a squared. 3a times 4 is 12a. Negative 2 times a is negative 2a. 12a's and negative 2a's add up to 10a's. And negative 2 times 4 is equal to negative 8. So I know I factored it right. How did I come up with that solution? Well, since there's no greatest common factor, I'm going to take the 3 and multiply it by the last term. Take that lead coefficient, multiply it by the last term. That will give me a squared plus 10a minus 24, because the negative 8 times 3 is negative 24. Then I factor that, and I get a minus 2 times a plus 12. Again, use the calculator or use AM. But since I multiplied by the lead coefficient of 3 here in the very beginning with the 8 to get to 24, which made it easy, I have to divide back in by that 3. So negative 2 divided by 3 and 12 divided by 3. Now, 12 divided by 3 simplifies to 4. So that's where my a plus 4 comes from. A minus 2/3 does not simplify, so I'm going to take that 3 that's in the denominator, just like in elementary school when I convert improper fractions and mixed numbers. I'm going to multiply by the 3 in front. So that gives me 3a minus 2. We already showed you that that checks. So that's the correct answer. Okay, time for your pretest. Prepare, focus, finish. That's the name of the game. I really hope you rock this test coming up, because you rocked the first test. If you rock the second one, boy, you're in great shape for the course for the year. Okay? Have a great one. Pretest coming up next.